Good morning and welcome back to the lecture series on partition of India in print media and cinema. We are talking about home and nostalgia. So, in this regard, we are going to talk about the question of belonging and what constitutes nostalgia. So, we were in our previous discussion, we were talking about the idyllic village. The idyllic village that transcends all notions of flaws. So, all notions of negativity, the timelessness and the transcendental qualities, the positivity that is associated with such a rural life does not always, or in fact in most times correspond with the ground reality. How the rural society would function entailed a lot of politics and class as well as caste discriminations, which are glossed over, which are basically glossed over and kind of under mentioned, even not mentioned when we look at the concept of an idyllic village. The idyllic village has its transcendental quality, its superlative qualities that upholds its unparalleled picture, its association with a kind of its association with a prelapsarian innocence and its pristinity, which is celebrated through nostalgia, through one's reminiscing of the past. When we talk of roots, one's base provenance, we are talking about stability in terms of territorial, social, cultural belonging. So, when partition rendered a given people the status of the displaced or the refugee, these fixities in terms of one's language, ethnicity, one's caste, one's family, one's village, all these things were being uprooted, being so the meanings, these meanings of belonging were being reshuffled and obfuscated or engulfed by the liberal secular paradigm, a larger paradigm that came and replaced and engulfed the earlier meanings of roots and fixity. And so, that is how the liberal secular paradigm actually shaped the identity of the residents in the new nation state. So, partition induced displacement as an ambiguous state of exile and nostalgia. So, we see that there is this ambivalence which marks one's longing for the homeland. So, while there are positive sentiments and the desire to return for a visit to one's homeland never actually dies out. So, the myth that the homeland is the homeland as a mental scape, as part of one's way of thinking never goes away, even after a person is displaced and positioned in the new nation state. And yet we see such positive sentiments, such superlative meanings of homeland are deterred or in fact are darkened by fear and a sense of insecurity about one's being, one's existence among the other. So, we see that the return to homeland is impossible because it has changed beyond recognition. This is something we see in many of the artworks. So, for example, in Joginder Paul's Sleepwalkers, we see that there is a part where Paul is talking about the Muhajirs, the refugees, carrying a part of Lucknow in them when they have migrated to Karachi. So, this is a section of Muslim refugees that have migrated from Lucknow to Karachi, and some of them are carrying some houses with them, others are carrying a mohalla or a gully, and others are carrying yet a larger portion of Lucknow with them inside their mind, and it seems like they are walking in sleep. They are somnambulant. They are so the entire story is about somnambulance, about people as though the migration, the change has happened only in the dream, and we have this character of Diwani Maulvi Sahib. So, Diwani Maulvi Sahib is still not convinced that he is displaced. He still feels that he is in a part of old Lucknow. So, we see this disorientation vis-a-vis the concept of homeland. So, the partition refugee is disoriented in the homeland, which has an uncanny resemblance with the real, and yet it can only survive in one's imagination. So, and this is exactly what we will also see in our subsequent discussion on Amitabh Ghosh's shadow lines, where what these lines are do these lines, these borders actually exist for real? They are but shadows, and across the two sides of this shadow exist mirror resemblances, mirror images. So, and we saw this in the short story by Amar Mitra, The Wild Goose Country, where at one point characters are really astonished, and they say that the people in the other side of the border look exactly like us. They speak almost the same language with maybe a different tonality or a different accent, but they are so similar that it is very strange to even accept that they belong to a foreign country. So, James Clifford in The Transit Lounge of Culture notes that diaspora cultures are not oriented towards lost origin or homelands, but are created by continuous process of ongoing migratory histories and its transitional cultural flows. So, going back to Diwani Maulvi Sahib, who feels that he does not go away or come back to anywhere or from anywhere but Lucknow. So, Lucknow is at the heart of his or Lucknow has essentially shaped his identity in such a way that if he goes away and comes back from somewhere, it is only with respect to Lucknow, and so he has no cognizance of another land where he is geographically present, where he is physically present, which is Karachi. He has no cognizance of Karachi. Karachi has no place in his mental scape, in his mental map. So, we also see how Maulvi Sahib is an apparition. He is living in some kind of a past, and he tends to disappear, like the guard sees him disappear. He is actually an apparition. He is dwelling in terms of past meanings, and people, when we talk of sleepwalking, it is almost like people have not come in terms with, they are yet to face up to the fact of partition, to the ruthless fact or the facts, the consequences of partition. Urvashi Barat says that Bengali literature on the refugee experience of partition is marked by commemorative mechanisms which help the refugees to recreate their lost spaces and their heterotopias. So, heterotopia, talking of heterotopia, we are thinking of a space which has a kind of continuation and yet a separation from the surroundings. So, it is marked as the other. its presence is marked as the other. There is a kind of inverted prism through which it sees the outside. So, the refugee people's lives were a continuation with the rest of the society, and yet there was a kind of abruptness, a kind of difference which could hardly be overcome or dissolved. So, the refugees were living in a kind of heterotopia. They were living with some inverted meanings, with some with a presence where they cannot really be merged. They insisted not being merged with the rest of the society, because that was also their, I mean, that is what defined the refugee identity, or becoming part of the native population would perhaps take away their identity crisis, and yet also take away their distinct identity, their distinctive, their claim to their loss, their claim to their trauma and their specific roots. So, in this respect, Ananya Jahanara Kabir says something very useful. She says that a helpful way of channelizing or expressing nostalgia in scholarship should be through a balanced act, which is accomplished through paying homage to memory, and yet also drawing attention to the constructed, fabricated and selective nature of such reminiscence, selective nature of the act of reminiscence, and one's inability to trace back to the original moment that one is referring to in the past. So, Shelley Feldman studies the Bengali immigrants and notes that the middle class Bengali Hindu immigrants were the primary articulators of melancholic sentiments of partition. The narratives they construct almost took the shape of a virtual myth, and they would commonly juxtapose the unadulterated, innocent and idyllic East Bengali past with the unsatisfactory and degraded society in Calcutta or in West Bengal. So, this kind of a binary meaning was being formed, and it was the immigrant population would very strongly believe in such binary meanings. They produced and in fact believed in such meanings. So, we see nostalgia is very much synonymous with the idea of sentimentalization. Sentimentalization very strongly plays a role in nostalgic works. So, we see that there is this reference to a particular utopian vision of the countryside. The focus in the case of Bengal is on the East Bengali home, the rural home, Desher Bari. So, the Desher Bari is emphasized without and there is this kind of silencing about certain aspects, such as there is when we talk of Desher Bari, we are normalizing the landlord and peasant relationship, whereas in most cases the landlords would be the Hindus and the Muslims would be the landless tenants toiling in the fields, and this picture of hierarchy is normalized and given an innocent appearance. So, there is a kind of timelessness, naturalness rendered to such a picture. So, the good Muslim, like we see in, for example, in Tulsi Lahiri's play Banglar Mati, the earth of Bengal, we see the service class, middle class Bengali man cannot actually bring himself to identify or relate with the Muslims, and it is only it's only with the Bhasha Andolan, the movement in Dhaka centering Bengali language, that the Muslims, the middle class Muslims or the Muslim intellectuals and the the Hindu middle class intellectuals kind of converge. So the movement brings people from diverse backgrounds who would otherwise not like to be conflated in terms of social status. The movement actually brings them under the same umbrella. So that is something we see in Lahiri, in Lahiri's work. We also see something, the quintessential image of peace, the good Muslim. I was talking about the good Muslim, I remember. So it is the Muslim servant who is sitting on the floor and serving the master of the house, who is sitting in a higher position, maybe sitting on a chair or on a bed. So this marked the kind of this was naturalized. So this was the peaceful picture of village life when the Muslims started demanding for more, when they started demanding their rights, and this picture of peace was thereby disturbed, unsettled, they became the bad Muslims. So we see this question in Ghatok's film Shivarna Rekha also. So colony life was seen as Nischinti. Colony life is marked by or defined by some kind of Nischinti. Nischinti means relief. So and relief or a sense of peace, a sense of undisturbed peace. And what defines this undisturbed peace? Basically dominance by upper caste, middle class, educated Hindus. So when one is able to coexist with with the similar kinds, that defines Nischinti. The anxiety begins with a life outside of the colony, outside of the refugee colony, where one is not necessarily in a dominant position. One has other struggles to face and deal with. So we see that pervasive stories of injustice and fall of the middle class Bengali immigrants do not incorporate the relation of dominance that the Bhadralok, the refined class Bengalis shared with the Bengali Muslims and the Dalit wage workers and peasants. This is normalized and seen as something that has no intrinsic sense of violence in it, or no intrinsic sense of injustice in it. So, Sara Ansari talks about the ethnic tensions between the migrants in Sindh and the local population. So, this was visible everywhere on both sides of the border. Conflicts between the locals and the newly migrating populace in Punjab was, however, muted. It was not allowed to exacerbate, and it was muted successfully, despite the fact that in places, in cities such as Lalpur and Ludhiana, the migrants actually outnumbered the established population. So, Punjab handled the refugee native conflict more successfully, and so this kind of rift was bridged in a more in a smoother way. So, this problem in the case of Bengal actually persisted for a longer time, where at the level of state there would be some facilities for the refugees, but at the level of, at the ground level, at the level of social acceptance, there would be some stigma, some taboos that barred them from being embraced into the mainstream. So Anushka Boshu Raichaudhuri talks about how the nostalgic narratives are written or are produced as a way of taking control of the frightening diversity and formlessness of the world. It is giving a structure to the past and a dominant structure through which one could look back at the past. And so, there is a puffing up of the desirable grand narrative which sutures or stitches together dissimilar experiences. So, in this regard, we see how Sedikides and other critics interpret nostalgia. They read nostalgia as predominantly positive, self-relevant and social emotion, and nostalgia being conducive in resurrecting the traumatized past. So, it puts together descriptions of loss, disappointment, death, separation, along with the euphoria of triumph and progress, such that the trajectory of the narrative is always marked by some kind of relapse followed by redemption, rebounding and further progress. So, historically the word nostalgia is associated with keywords such as warm, childhood, old times. So, its meaning is fully explored only in the realms of sentimentality. So, Sukrita Paul Kumar understands the importance of literary representations. She talks about the narrativity of partition through its spatial temporal distance from the author's immediate present, entailing, requiring use of strong imagination and transformation of historical truth into a fictionalized one. She is also talking about nostalgia being instrumental in giving vent to a host of newly encountered emotional and socio-cultural orientations. She is talking about the importance of literature, of imagination in intervening what she calls as the pornography of violence. So, talking too much of violence is once again relapsing and coinciding with the statistics, the historical statistics. So, basically Kumar asserts that literature has a greater space, it has its creative dimensions, so it can deal with the past in other ways than just depicting the pornography of violence, only showing carnage, loot, rape and devastation. There are other ways of showing complexity of human character, of difficulty of human characters. So, we see, like I said, that the image of the perfect rural life is problematized in subsequent partition scholarship that are being written by first generation literates from Dalit Bengali refugee groups. So, scholarship by the Dalits actually do not herald similar romanticized nostalgia about the Golden Bengal, because they describe generations of naturalized exploitation and a discriminatory village politics in pre-partition East Bengal. Dipesh Chakraborty in Remembered Villages talk about the Bengali Hindu memories tending to easily slip into nostalgic evocations of prelapsarian rural innocence and a bucolic idyll called Golden Bengal, which is a picture of rapture and bliss. So, in this regard, it might serve us to remember what filmmaker Atom Egoyan is saying. He says that it is impossible to narrativize trauma. So, trauma, when we try to bring back trauma through the silence of trauma through a kind of narrativity, through and try to give words to the silence that appropriates trauma in a way, the desire for a whole narrative, a holistic narrative, is always riddled with, contaminated with actual wholes. So, the whole is contaminated with wholes. So, there is a constant grappling with omissions and selections. What is being omitted in the process of retelling, recounting? The gaps point to the fundamental difficulty in integrating trauma into a narrative memory, right. So, in this regard, Ananya Kabir says something very important. She asks, or she suggests that the person doing the act of remembering should actually refer to a searing level of honesty within himself or herself in order to and also understand the complicated nature of memory and one's own compromised subjectivity, who is and should understand the compromised subjectivity of the person who is looking back at the past, who is trying to recount the past. So, when we talk of certain aspects of village life, we should, and certain aspects are over discussed, they are in the fore of discussion. Such modes of remembrance can only happen at the cost of under focusing or marginalizing other possibilities of looking back at the past. So, people that migrated always had their memories about their place of birth, where they grew up, right. So, the line of the line at the official level, or the line drawn by the politicians for administrative purpose, the lines might have bureaucratic meanings, official bordering of states, but they could never divide the sentiments and memories of the people. So, rehabilitation measures, I was talking about the paradox involved in such measures, where the state would ensure the refugees, the state's aim was to resettle the refugees through a number of schemes, whereas the refugees would often face hostilities from the native or established communities who showed a lack of social acceptance towards the newly arrived population. We always had this variance in terms of the social and state protection and acceptance of the refugees on the one hand, making them eligible for entitlement on the one hand, and then excluding them from the cultural community was something that could be discovered as ground reality. So, we see that oral history or culling of informative data is associated with attempting to bring undocumented voices into the picture. It is a way of putting another angle which is contrastive with the official history and interpretations of events construed by the ruling elite. So, interpretation of the testimonials of the ordinary or the subaltern individuals create, it is an initiative towards creating the human archive. Oral narrative offers a different perspective which does not always oppose, but also complement and enrich they enrich history with first hand testimonials. And so, we see that the writing of history can be seen as an exchange with personal narratives. There is an intricate dialogue both with the past and others inquiring into the past. So, when we study this dialogue, that can be retrieved through the process of interviewing, through looking at the oral recounting of partition and so forth. We see that the dialogue or exchange is mediated in multiple ways through disciplinary protocols and critical exchanges, so this dialogue is both constraining and enabling, and it forms rich fields for new research and self criticism, right. So, within historiography or history, when we bring in the question of an intricate dialogue, we are actually digging further into the past, we are making rooms for self criticism and for further research, further scopes of research. So, Dominic Lacapra talks of trauma as transformed or transvalued into a legitimating myth of origins. Trauma from a position of crisis or catastrophe which disorients the collectivity can lead to the formation of a renewed origin of the myth, right. And it can serve an ideological function in authorizing acts or policies which appeal for justice or justification. A story told from the position of trauma can take place of a renewed origin of the same myth. Writing becomes a medium of expressing content, and its ideal goal is to be an open window to the past or an open window in the past, with figures of rhetoric serving as a instrumental role in further illustrating the facts. So, the distinction between historical and fictional statements are there, but there are also some overlaps between the two, we see Hayden White and Frank Ankersmith talking about the identity or essential similarity between historiography and fiction, literature and aesthetic productions on structural level. So, White talks about the discursive analog of the middle voice being suitable for representing the traumatic limit events such as the Holocaust. So, the narrative substance or structure as fictive and politically or ideologically. So, the narrative substance or the narrative structure both in history and in literary writings and creative works are politically and ideologically motivated as much in one as in the other. So, Frank Ankersmith says, we can never test our conclusions by comparing the elected text with the past itself. So, narrative substances do not refer to the past. So, the narrative language is always metaphorical, and we can only speak at the level of a statement. And so, history is a substitute for a past that can never be recovered, right. And when history history in fact institutionalizes itself or legitimizes itself through claiming to be a substitute, a holistic substitute for the absent past, and that is when it is construed, or it claims when history is construed and fetishized as a totalized object, right. So, Lacapra talks about the fictional narratives outdoing the historical recording in terms of truth claim by giving a plausibility for experience and emotion which is not present in formal historiography and through restricted documentary methods. So, we in non-historical writings, in personal narratives, we find what Lacapra calls as mutually interrogative relation between historiography and art. So, the Lacapra talks about this mutually interrogative relation between historiography and art, which complicates a binary relationship between the two. In fact, we see that memorial documentation, by virtue of their collective assertion and repetition, can command a totalitarian substitution for the absent past, and the memorial writings can take the shape or form an archive and be prone to similar fetishism and closure as a historical text. through claiming to true things picture and the right picture from the past, and this is something we therefore see in the canonical narratives that in a way appropriate the subject, the topic of partition. So, Jan, so we see that nation states produce narrative versions about a past which are taught, embraced, trained to learn, and they are referred to as part of the collective autobiography. National history is presented in the public arena in the form of monuments, in the form of commemoration dates, and to participate in a national memory is to know the key events about the nation's history, and also to know and embrace the symbols that shape the nation and to connect with the festive dates. Jan Assmann talks about cultural memory being based on two functions. So, on the one hand, we are presenting a narrow selection of texts that acquire sacrosanct value, artistic masterpieces and key historic events that are rendered timeless frameworks. Then we also stored some secondary documents and artifacts that do not meet such superlative standard of representing the nation, yet nevertheless they are deemed interesting or important enough, and so we do not let them vanish in the oblivion. They somewhere stay in stored in our archive. So, but they do not constitute the meaning of the nation. So, the institutions of passive cultural memory are situated somewhere between the canon and between forgetting. So, there are some dates and symbols that shape the nation, others that are left situated halfway between remembering and or canon and forgetting. And so, these archives can be said to be the future about the present. It can be said, archive is the basis of what can be said in the future about the present, when it will have become the past, right. So, once updated, the archives lose their political function and their relevance. The historical archive is a receptacle for documents that have fallen out of their framing institutions, and so they entail reframing and reinterpreting in a new context. It is the onus of the researcher, the academic, to re-examine these contents of the archive and reclaim the information, re-examine them, scrutinize them within a new context. So, we see that what the mind can remember or what objects can help us document about the past does not define the memory. A memory is much more than just remembering certain objects or documents from the past. It is a more complex phenomenon, and memory poses ethical challenges, like Chakraborty would note. It poses ethical challenges to the to the historian who approaches the past with the only approach, with the only objective, tell me all. So, he is talking about a historian who wants to grasp the entire meaning or the entire significance of the past. So, the question of creating something sentimental and nostalgic in print or through artwork aims at retrieving the lost home, the lost village, the village left behind, and this was the task that the refugees, at least from the Bengal side, had set themselves. So, through writings they were trying to bring back the past that was that could not be retrieved otherwise. So, on the one hand, when we talk of the question of past actually has two components to it, two sides. One is the sentiment of nostalgia and the other is the sense of trauma. So, without a claim to victimization rendered by partition, the memory of trauma cannot be legitimized. So, literary imagination here plays an important role in the process of recovering, where Hindus and Muslims attempt to map the contours of the mutilated land, of the divided land, as a way of creating a site of belonging, habitation and memory. So, this can be seen through the lens of Lacan and Freud, who say that the event of trauma by its very ambiguous nature recedes to the background, whereas fantasies surrounding this topic overpower both individual and collective psyches. So, Meenakshi Mukherjee notes that just as a cartography or a map is the science of codifying space, history is the discipline of narrativizing time. And so, in our next lecture, we are going to talk about shadow lines, where memory merges with history, fiction merges with reality, in order to symbolize that the borders can only be conceived as shadows. The borders are seen as shadows, and they are understood when approached through the subjective perspective of an individual. They are not concrete. They are more fluid, they are overlapping, and so there is a kind of continuity between the two sides of the border, and the border stands in between as a shadow, constantly facing the devastating consequences and subscribing to its own meaninglessness. With this, I am going to stop today's lecture, and we will meet again for our next round of discussions. Thank you.